Was Nelson Mandela a terrorist or a freedom fighter? Were he to flee South Africa today, would he be granted refugee protection? I'm Sarah Singer, Programme Director of the MA in Refugee Protection and Forced Migration Studies. One of the core parts of our MA programme is considering who qualifies as a refugee under international law. And one of the key issues we discuss is how the global war on terror has affected refugees and asylum seekers by influencing the definition of who is entitled to international protection. The Refugee Convention, which is the leading international instrument concerning refugees, states that individuals who are suspected of committing serious crimes are not entitled to protection. So in effect, they're excluded from refugee status on account of their past criminality. Now there's a balance here between protecting those that are seeking international protection and ensuring the integrity of the international refugee regime. Over the past 2 decades, in line with the increased international attention that's focused on the threat posed by terrorism, the United Nations Security Council has repeatedly called on states to exclude terrorists from refugee status. You might think this is quite sensible. Well, the problem here is that the UN is repeatedly calling on states to exclude terrorists from refugee status, but without providing a definition of terrorism. Now, there are many definitions of terrorism that exist, both in international and domestic law, but not one has achieved universal acceptance. In effect, the UN is granting quite a broad discretion to states to determine what terrorism is and who is a terrorist. So what is terrorism? Well, simply speaking, a terrorist act can be any political activity that's intended to intimidate a population or coerce a government to take some form of action. The range of acts that could fall within this definition are potentially quite broad, so this could range from planting a bomb in a shopping centre to a political demonstration. And it's down to states to determine how wide or narrow their definition of terrorism might be. There's also the question of whether an exception should be made for national liberation movements, freedom fighters, and this is where Nelson Mandela comes back into the picture. Nelson Mandela was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and he led his country, South Africa, to democracy. However, he was also the founder of the armed wing of the African National Congress, which were engaged in armed activity against the then South African government. Nelson Mandela himself admitted that the ANC, in their fight against apartheid, violated human rights. So was Nelson Mandela a terrorist or a freedom fighter? And how many other groups might be caught under the term terrorism? What about the rebels that overthrew the Gaddafi regime in Libya, or other groups engaged in uprisings during the Arab Spring? What about the Free Syrian Army and other groups involved in armed conflict against the Assad regime in Syria? And what if these actions are only directed against the state's military forces? Do civilians need to be killed or injured in order for the acts to amount to terrorism? And how far does support for terrorism extend? These are some of the questions we'll be discussing on the MA in Refugee Protection and Forced Migration Studies. If you'd like to find out more, please visit our website.